Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 371. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have back with us the award-winning and acclaimed author, Celia Ryker.
Hello.
Celia, how's it going?
It's great. It's a sunny afternoon.
There you go. See, you can't complain about the sun. See,
No.
Before we started the interview, we were talking about you were on last year, so you are officially my first returning guest that has also been published by Rootstock Publishing. See, look at that. And you came back on. You were on last year talking about your book Augusta, and I remember, and we were talking about it in our interview, and I'll have to pull up in the interview. But you mentioned that you're going to be working on a children's book or a middle grade novel. Sure enough, I was checking out the press releases on Rootstock Publishing, and big guy showed up, and I saw the name Celia Ryker on there. I'm like, I know exactly what this book is.
I told you all about it last year.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can jump right into this now and talk about, because I mean, you were mentioning that you grew up with horses. You worked a lot as a horse trainer as your one of your careers,
my
correct?
earliest career, yes.
And so talk about the inspiration behind Big Guy.
The dedication is to my sister, Faye, and the hours we used to spend sitting on the pasture fence, looking at the school horses out in the field and wondering, I wonder what Shorty would talk like if she could speak, what she would sound like. And then we started wondering what she might say. And pretty soon we were talking, Slippy would sound like this. And so, yes, we that's where it started, with us just wondering what they would sound like and what they might say. And most of the stories in the book actually did happen.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
There is one where Slippy sticks his head through a screen window, and he came home back to the farm with a screen hanging on his neck. And it was years before I found out where it came from. And it was a woman who told me, one of your horses, one night, I was washing dishes, it was dark out, and suddenly he was there with his face right over my kitchen sink. So Slippy just put his head through the window. And when he pulled back, the screen and the frame came with him. So the next morning I found him wearing that.
So what made you decide to make this a middle grade novel instead of like saying just a adult
I wrote it
prose?
for my 10-year-old self. When I was young, I was always looking for horse books to read. And when I began writing this, I found myself writing it for my middle grade self.
Okay.
And I wrote it from the horse's point of view, similar to Black Beauty. Big Guy is telling his own story.
So you mentioned that the idea first came about wondering what horses, if horses could talk, what they would be like.
What they would sound like and what they might say, yes.
How did you define their personality traits then?
Well, Shorty is just a sweet, round little quarter horse, and we thought she would have a sweet voice, and she would be very polite, and she would always introduce herself if a new horse came in, and so that is her personality in the book. And Kaiser tended, if another horse got too close to him, he tended to kick at them, and we decided Kaiser would be feisty and a little bit standoffish, but a good guy all around. And then and Slippy is part Clydesdale, and we decided he'd have a very deep voice. And and he was able to just take that big body and push it right through a fence so all the horses could escape. He was really big on taking everyone for a wild ride down the road.
Right. Once you've kind of determined like the personalities of the horses, reading this through, are we reading it through, as you say, like through a human's perspective or through a specific horse's perspective?
It's through Big Guy's perspective. He is telling his story. And he's a show horse who has won at the biggest horse shows all over the country. And as he gets older and a little arthritic, he's not winning the way he did. And his people decided that the best thing for him would be to become a school horse. a horse used for giving riding lessons, and that way he wouldn't work as hard as a show horse, but he would also still be getting regular exercise and good care, but he wouldn't be groomed to the sheen he's been groomed, and that's one of the things he was very upset about. He's going to
Hmm.
have whiskers on his muzzle and hair sticking out of his ears. Ew. And, these are things he's not thrilled about. But what he doesn't realize is that as a show horse, he's been so coddled that he's turned out in a private paddock every day. He hasn't been in a pasture with other horses since he was a baby. And his social skills are very poor. He says and does the wrong thing over and over again.
And so from that perspective, as a middle grade novel, what are some of those what are some of those themes that younger readers are going to pick up on?
Well, I would compare his coming into the school horse string with a young person changing schools in the middle of a school term,
Okay.
where they don't know anyone, and it's they have to learn how to get along in a situation that's completely unfamiliar. And also, it would be he's upset because he's moving down more than a notch, and he thinks he's better than some of these horses, and he tries to be humble, but he's not very good at it.
and and so you mentioned as well as that, so the illustrator you have here, Kathy Connell.
Yes, friend
uh
of mine who is also an
okay.
equine veterinarian. I told her what I was looking for. I named a couple of illustrators that I liked, Sam Savitt and Paul Brown, and I told her I'm looking for a Sam Savitt, Paul Brown sort of. And she sent me some drawings, and I thought, oh, these are perfect.
Hmm.
And so she did a wonderful job, and she did such a good job that the Rootstock Publishing created their first coloring book. There's an
Really?
accompanying coloring book with Big Guy, and just in the past week, I've had two people tell me that their 7 or 8 year old daughter read the book, and they were in the process of reading it to their younger daughter, who's coloring in the coloring book while they're reading to her. So I thought, oh, this is so cool. So yes, I think that's Rootstock's first coloring book.
Wow.
But the drawings were. I expected her to produce some lovely drawings, but they're better than I anticipated. And that cover art she created with colored pencils.
Because you mentioned that some of these were inspirational when you were when you were young.
Right.
Figuring out, and a lot of these were based off of true events that happened with your horses.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any stories that you really liked? Any memories you really liked, but just couldn't fit within the storyline or just with the rhythm of the book?
There are so many stories that I'm thinking about another book because, yeah, there are other horses and other stories. And here in Michigan, I have a lot of students who know many of the horses in this book. And on Facebook,
Okay.
they're talking about, oh, is Kaiser in the book? Is Crossroads in the book? And he's not. And and they're naming all these horses. And so these are students who learned how to ride on the horses I'm writing stories about. So there's I've got some ideas for a possible series of 3. Haven't started that part yet. Just I have notes, but I haven't. I'm working on a different piece now. So
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. And so would each book kind of be named after one of the horses?
I'm trying to decide. I've got several storylines that I can go on with Big Guy, further storylines with Big Guy. But one of the things I had someone who read the book said, I noticed you never really told Paper Moon's story. And I thought, yeah, Paper Moon may have a completely different story here. So yes, I may go with stories of some of the other school horses.
What were some of the hardest parts about compare this to your previous books that you've written? How was authoring your previous books helped you in writing Big Guy?
Oh, writing. Well, in the first iteration of my very first book was it was a memoir about hiking Vermont's Long Trail on aging legs.
Yep.
That was
Yeah.
Walking Home. And I wrote that book. It was miles too long, and I had almost no dialogue in it because I couldn't remember exactly what people said, and I couldn't remember their names. But everybody has trail names, and so, and I was talking to another author who said, "Do you think the man who wrote Angela's Ashes remembered exactly what his parents said when he was 5?" No, he remembered the gist of the conversation, and I thought, oh. And when I started putting dialogue in, it flowed so much better, and I could shorten the book dramatically, make it a lot easier to read. It was way too long to start with. And writing Augusta, I did tell that from my grandmother's point of view, so I became accustomed to telling the story from one of the characters' points of view. Um, so, and that is what I did with Big Guy. He tells his story.
Hmm. Talk about like the editing process. Is this book much larger than you thought it was going to be, or has it been edited down a lot more
This
than you were
no,
planning on?
I was better at getting it where it needed to be. My first book was miles too long, and I was better with Augusta. And this one, I came pretty close to having it right, but I've learned how to revise as I go,
Okay.
and I don't revise until every scene is perfect. But I'll get this scene feeling very good, and then move to the next. And and when I wrote my first book, I wrote the whole book, and then I went back to revise, and it was so much more difficult and time consuming. But I do remember years ago, I saw a man at the Detroit airport. He was wearing a T-shirt, and it said, "I'm an author. I write." And then I revise, and it went around and around and around his shirt, and it became smaller and smaller until it dribbled off the hem of his T-shirt. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm doing. You revise, you write, because I have to say that when I get to the point where on Monday I take out the comma and add the word and on Tuesday I take out the and put the comma back in place, it's time to stop. If you're just playing with it that hard. But sometimes the just shortening it up a bit, just tightening it is one of the things I've learned working with the writers group I'm in is to start late, end early, and with every scene I try to do that and try to use as few words as possible. One of our when it's a writers group that I work with, and often we'll say, okay, let's take the scene that they've written and remove 57 words and see what happens. And many times it's so much better. It tightens it. I wrote articles, gardening articles for a local newspaper here in Michigan for a while. And when I wrote the article, I never thought about word count. And then I brought it back down to what it was supposed to be. And that, I think, makes everything tighter.
Right.
Um, and I do remember one of my first books that I read on the subject of the craft of writing was Stephen King's book. And one of the things he said was, the first thing I do is get rid of all of my adverbs. If I have the right verb, I do not need an adverb. So that's one. And go after the wheres and thens. And when he saw them coming, he just said, no, he saw them coming. So
Hmm.
you get rid of just a word or two here and there, and it tightens everything up, and it makes it read so much smoother.
Hmm. And so you mentioned you've published two books already, and this being your third one, but you still go to a writers group.
Oh,
So
yes,
even though you've published books, you still go. You still feel writers groups are important.
very much so. I joined the League of Vermont Writers years ago, and during one of their early meetings where you're talking to, hearing from agents and other authors, two different speakers at this seminar said, if you're not working with a writers group, you're working at a disadvantage.
Mm,
And especially with this book, because I'm writing about a subject I know so well, horses, I needed someone who didn't know horses to remind me that I need to explain what a hand is and how horses are measured. And I need to explain some of the lingo that I took for granted. So, and
mm,
some of it's the that I've been working in this for so long that I assume everybody knows these things. So, and that can happen when you're working in a discipline that you're so accustomed to.
right. So, because you mentioned like this is for middle grade authors, middle grade readers. What are some of the things that, as you mentioned before, you have to kind of explain a bit? What things in the book that you just take for granted that a reader is going to understand about horses?
Well, I didn't know that everyone doesn't know that school horses are used to give riding lessons. One woman said, "No, we always called them lesson horses," and she was a woman who worked with horses. And I said, "Oh, we always called them school horses." So that's one thing, that a little thing, and it's my subtitle, a school horse story. So so that's a little bit of the lingo that and the different, we mentioned a different type of bit, that he works in the mildest snapple bit, so that, and that's so young children won't hurt his mouth if they bobble around a bit. But it's hard for me to think of what some of the horse shows that what an equitation class is. That was one for sure, where the hunter classes, they're judging the performance of the horse, and in an equitation class they're judging the form and position of the rider.
Hmm.
So, and I, in my first early drafts, I assumed everybody knew the difference between an equitation class and an honor class, and I had to explain what that the rider is being judged now, and my rider has scoliosis, so when she's sitting straight, one shoulder blade sticks out more than the other, and she appears to be sitting crooked. And so, and I did have a student like that, and her grandmother created a falsie of a shoulder blade in her hunt coat so that her shoulders looked even. And she
Hmm.
started doing well in the equitation classes. I knew she was sitting straight. She knew she was sitting straight, but the judge didn't. So
Right.
these little things because I had been in this line of work for so long, I took for granted that everyone would know what equitation is.
So even though these were based off of stories and memories that you had years ago, did the characters take on a life of their own and went in directions that you weren't planning?
Yes, that's happened. That happened with Augusta too. I
Huh.
There were times when I thought that I was channeling my grandmother. I'd sit down to write one thing and write something else, and that happened a little bit here too. I want to how tell about when Shorty got sick, and I got a little emotional about Shorty. What's going to happen to her? I'm writing this story, and I'm worried that something's going to be horribly wrong. Yeah, that I do, and these are animals that I knew over many years, and so. But as I was writing it, I did find myself getting a little emotional about the fact that, oh, Shorty can't. We can't let anything happen to Shorty.
If people want to pick up this book, where is the best place they could go to find this book?
Like all rootstock books, it is available wherever books are sold. You can order it on
Okay.
Amazon. Your favorite bookstore can get it. Um, Almost all of the online book vendors, Book Hub, Barnes and Noble, you can order it through any of those venues.
Perfect. As they say, Big Guy, it's a school horse story. It's about accepting changes, making new friends, and dealing with the curves life sends your way. And so it ended the way you hoped it would be then, huh?
Yes, I wasn't exactly with all three of my books. I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to end. I knew where it was going to end, but I wasn't sure how it was going to end. Um, and yes, I it ends with Big Guy becoming happy as a school horse, not just accepting it, but actually enjoying it.
Hmm. That's a good ending.
He
That's
learned
nice. Yeah.
not just he didn't learn to survive; he learned to thrive.
We got to make this a regular thing. Come on every year with your new book
I
then.
I would love to.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for coming on again.
Well, thanks for having me. This was quite fun.
Yeah, so this was just a pre-show banter, Celia. See, if,
Yeah, I thought it might be.
just like last time. Yeah,
He has a rather casual show.
yeah. So when you were on last time, it was 240. Episode was 246, and now this is episode 371. So yeah, it's about like 130 episodes later, Cecilia. So every 130 episodes, you'll come back on with another book, then. Huh?
Okay, I'm okay with that.